big Palladian window?
Just a,
Town office window, the seal's broken.
Oh, I did notice one.
Just the
Yeah,
front
one of the
window.
big ones.
The big plate glass window.
yeah. It's a big window.
Welcome, everybody. It's 4 o'clock. It's time for the Camden Downtown Design Team. Those, just to remind everybody, green on our microphone means you're being recorded, and if the instructions say, keep it close to our mouth when we want to speak. And welcome to the meeting. Our first item of agenda is to approve the minutes from January the 14th, 2020, either corrections or whatever. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a quorum. We're good, so we can vote if we have to. I'm sure Dave will be here.
I move that we accept them as written. I've read them and certainly approve.
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. Okay, we are missing, so far, Dave Jackson. I didn't hear that he's not coming. Of course, Meg Keanu is out of town, and Raffi is on his way back from New Hampshire, where he was doing some pre-primary campaigning. He left some time today, and he didn't think he would be back in time, but so.
That's for the right candidate?
Who knows? If you
sure.
look at the New Hampshire ballot, there are only like 20
I know,
people on the
yeah.
Democratic primary.
Even when they showed it on the news, I was like, how do you even find the person you're
I
looking
know,
for?
it wasn't even alphabetical.
The next thing we were going to talk about is, and I called it all kinds of things, and it is the report done by the Wood consultants
That was
on the public landing,
fascinating.
which was your request from our last meeting, and it was the resiliency report and recommendations for what to do on the public landing. And hi, Dave. Hi. You haven't missed anything, just approving the minutes. We're just starting on item 2.
Yeah, I had a
Yes.
follow-up item before you get into the big one, too.
What I was going to say was that Mark Ratner had talked to Jeremy about coming to speak to us about it, but Jeremy is in a meeting in Augusta. So I think we could have a discussion amongst ourselves, but if we have any serious questions, unless this gentleman.
I don't really know a lot about that topic, so.
I know there was an article that I sent everybody this afternoon that I spotted, that they're using that report to do some capital planning. But shall we keep that on the list and have Jeremy come to our next meeting? Would you like
Yeah,
that?
and we could still discuss whatever it was that we might have.
What you observe about it. Did you want to do something before we got to that subject?
I just had a short follow-up with what I was asked to do last meeting about the mural.
Okay, well, we'll get to that.
Oh,
That's
good.
that's
Great.
number 3 on the agenda, if I had my numbers. No, it's actually number 4. We have two number 2s. Meg.
So what was interesting to me is they basically said that kind of any building that were to be built either needs to be essentially on stilts or moved back to higher ground.
Right.
And then they showed the mapping of, where higher ground is based on, how far into the future you are, kind of a thing. And so.
This, you're talking about?
Yes, and so
Camera.
actually Steve Pixley's idea of having the harbor master's office on stilts, if it's going to be near the harbor, is in sync with that report. The downside of that is that essentially where the harbor master's office currently is essentially just rubble. That is nothing to put a foundation onto. And in my view, the only place you're going to get a good foundation for a building like that is actually to build it out over the water so you can hammer pilings down into the harbor bed, just like you were building a wharf. And then the building is up. Because otherwise you're moving it back away until you get to a place where it's actual natural earth and not fill.
Do you know how far back? I mean,
It's a
I
commercial-
couldn't
this
tell
said
by the
commercial
report.
street. This said up, in the commercial.
Basically,
street.
yeah, the grassy sward, as I call it, beside the
below Lily Lupin.
Exactly, is high ground, and you could obviously access something from the ground floor off of Harbor Walkway, but that might not serve the necessary purpose of the harbor master being able to see, because I went and walked and stood there, and I'm like, you really can't see anything from here. So I was like, this is really interesting.
We
And
can
I,
always
and
do a
I don't know,
houseboat.
like, I don't even know if the town had any records when they built the public landing or back when there was the anchor company and all that, essentially, when you look, when you're down on the water and look back, there's that seawall that's been built, but behind it, it's fill, I mean, obviously, the ledge slopes in some indeterminate way under there, but you would have to really, excavate a huge thing to find out what's going on unless you.
Or do core.
You could do core
drilling,
borings.
yeah.
You could do
How
that.
did they figure out that it's all rubble?
You can just see that it's all rubble back there. Yeah, and,
Doesn't the report talk a little bit
yeah,
about
it
that?
talks about how there needs to be something that there's just loose rock behind the actual stones, and then on top of it, it's gravel, and they're worried about that gravel eroding with, with wave action. So, and then they put a price tag on that office of,
50?
oh no, the harbor master's office was going to be $500,000, which I can see.
Didn't they reduce it later?
I don't know, I was just, the report that I read, there was quite a lot of big price tags. I think the bathrooms were less, surprisingly.
750, on the replacement retrofitting on the bathrooms, I think they're talking about that needing to be done for the midterm, which is 2050. They don't have anything on it because it takes the getting to the 2-foot rise before the public restrooms are affected.
Did they have the pumping station in there?
They didn't seem to, I didn't
I was
mention
thinking
it
about
like
that
they
after.
didn't know it was there.
That's like to
Big
me,
deal.
it's gonna cost more to fix the pumping station that's right next to the bathroom than it would be to fix the bathroom, because the pumping station is essentially pumping everything to the treatment.
Yeah, the bathroom's like the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, I mean, I think your cost is gonna be the lift station, because that's gonna be
Huge.
a big cost as
Yeah.
opposed to a bathroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, it's $500,000 to relocate and secure a harbor master's office. That seems like,
Well, if you have to build it on a foundation, and then it has to be elevated so that people have to access it, you're now talking about
Accessibility, right.
mechanical means of getting up there, and the whole thing, so,
I don't think they would build, I mean, I know in another location I was looking at, they were looking at building the ground.
yeah, so then that's another question. And what was interesting also, a friend of mine spent the weekend in Boston, and he just happened to get into a conversation with a Boston city planner who was telling him about what they're doing on Boston Harbor to prepare for all this. And basically, everything has to be on stilts. If you're building a new building on Boston Harbor, it's got to be, there's nothing on the first floor. It has to be just, the water can wash in and wash out.
Yeah.
Like, okay, interesting.
I found that article and this one follow-up in the paper, so daunting that a subject like the harbor master's building, in a way, didn't even deserve much thought other than having a building that is portable, as like a shed city building that you put where it is today, and then I won't say move it when the water comes up because it won't be here that long, but not to go to the expense of having a blowout foundation, which is what those stilt ones are like, and all the stuff associated with it, like disabled access, etc.
Yeah.
But we, not this committee, not this town, but the globe, has a very daunting subject ahead of it. And I sort of visualize that public landing, if anything came to mind, it was like the library lawn over the the new library, but it had always been up there, like a raised podium. But it's major, and you wouldn't want to throw good money into bad, of having something that just isn't going to be there for long.
Even if you don't think about the sea level rise issue, that harbor master's office needs to be replaced. It's not adequate in size.
Yep.
It's to me, it's an aesthetic issue as well as a practical issue for the use down there on the harbor. And you raise a really good point. How much do you invest now in a building if you know short-term? Even present day, of course, the picture that Susan used was the picture of the water already inundating the harbor master's office, and something has to be done. I like your idea of a building that can be picked up and moved.
Well, not for every store.
That's the problem is, if you have like a Shed City building, you only need to get to a certain level before it's floating, right? And then it's going to wind up on the library lawn. So,
Or out on Curtis Island.
When I said Shed City, I just meant something that's
Right.
like,
Which is what we have. What we
Yeah.
have there is that
Right.
level of construction. Maybe Shed City construction is better. I don't mean to insult
No.
Shed City people at all. But what we have there looks like to me, when you're in it, a temporary building. And we don't need to spend $150,000 on another temporary
that
building.
building over the water, there are parts of that sound really intriguing. I don't know whether you can build over the water without Corps of Engineers saying you can. And it sounds like a real expensive building, like that foundation is like.
Well, it'd be on
Well,
pilings.
the thing is, it's like building a wharf. So as long as it doesn't have water, if it just has electricity, I think you would probably get permission to do that. The other thing is, should like the harbor master's office be a boat? Should it be like a floating barge and just like it's his barge and,
He'd like that,
and
especially
it
in the
gets
winter
hauled
when
out
it's
in
near
the
the
winter
Bahamas.
time, because he
Yeah.
doesn't go, whatever. I don't know.
Like a houseboat.
Like a houseboat. I think it's a good idea, too. Then it's always going to be okay.
It's gonna-
Well, the pier needs to be replaced anyhow, right?
Yeah.
So why can't those two things be combined? If you're going to put in pilings for the pier, then put in some extra ones for the harbor master's office and have him right down there on the edge.
So when you talk about the pier, I think about the two
Walkways or, well,
things that go out where the boats, we have two
oh, well, those are
things
floats.
that go out,
not- those are
the long,
floats, yeah.
but they have boats attached to them.
Yeah,
They're
they're
not
still
really
floats.
floats them. Okay, both of those long things are floats. So which is the pier?
I'm talking about the walkway.
Oh, the boardwalk. has the
Boardwalks. I
pier.
couldn't
That's
search
okay,
for the
that's
right-
fine.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's all part of the same
Well,
structure. But the pier is the boardwalk and the wharf is everything behind it.
Isn't there some issue with the state, sorry. Isn't there some issue with the state ownership of anything from the water out? That, don't we have to pay some kind of fees already to use, maybe,
You mean the submerged land lease
Mark?
stuff?
Yeah, is that,
There's submerged land leases.
Mark, do you know anything about that?
Submerged land leases and where that kicks in on the harbor? I don't know if that happens low tide or,
I really don't know, I've heard about them and I wonder how they apply.
I don't know anything about them.
I don't think I've ever heard it.
Except it's,
About submerged land leases?
it's quite a practice to build water-dependent buildings out over the water. That's done quite a lot.
Still? Houseboat.
Really? Yeah, I think so.
Seems to me that setbacks and all of those issues are going to be reevaluated under these circumstances.
I think they all are.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be higher than what's
Yeah.
currently there, obviously.
If it was on some vessel like a houseboat, would that give the proper perspective to a harbor master? Do you want to be higher, or can
You
you?
need a tuna boat so we could go up in the tuna tank.
Yeah,
Well, why couldn't you build one
Interesting
with
day.
a rooftop visibility?
Lookout, yeah.
Rooftop lookout. You're hired.
Good, that's a good idea. I mean,
No, it's an
we're looking
excellent
into it.
idea. And as they go forward on the planning and capital planning, that's a worthwhile idea to put out there. Not that it might be any less money, but it might be something that would last longer than doing it, doing one, a temporary fix or moving it so far back.
It is not a harbor.
Yeah, that it's really not a harbor master's office. I mean, if it's moved all the way back to the Chamber of Commerce building,
Yeah. Why? Why
yeah,
have it?
exactly. Doesn't suit the harbor master. He'd have to be on his boat the whole time anyway. Any other thoughts or comments about it? We could certainly, Mark, I noticed the article from Susan Mustapich today.
I don't think I saw it.
I think I sent it to you, but you might not have checked your email. I think I sent it to everybody on the design team. And one of the things that I think was interesting, late this afternoon, I mean, it might have been 1:30 or something
had a chance to
when I
look.
noticed it, that our town manager, Audra, was talking about, using the report for capital planning, and saying to hold off on other infrastructure projects for the next few years, because we'll be retiring a fair amount of debt and do this kind of planning, and then save our infrastructure capital planning dollars for a project this large. And the good news is, she talked about the short-term projects that were still on the list and we're going to go forward, and they are the Mechanic Street parking lot, paving and drainage, the streets that you've talked to us about, the Pearl Street, Sand Street, and Norwood Street, and the Opera House building projects. But it sounds like to me that other projects are going to be put further down on the list while how to plan for this gets tackled. Does that seem like what you've heard?
Yeah, I think that explained it pretty well.
That makes like really good sense. Save your money and have whatever's done down there planned properly.
Yeah, I think
So-
that was
Maybe a little bit different than some other large projects we've had in the past 5 years. That didn't proper planning.
Out of curiosity, are the town buildings, like maybe not the harbor master's office, but the public restrooms and the pump station insured, so that if there is some kind of like major storm with a big storm surge and it like takes out the pump and whatnot, that might be what triggers rebuilding, because we'll have insurance money to fix something? Or is it just like, oh, well, that's that? I
I'm
don't
sure
know.
they're insured.
Yeah, I think like the
Oh,
lift
yeah.
stations, if something
Yeah.
happened to them, they're covered under the insurance, but I don't think that, it's more a replacement of what's broken. I don't think it's.
But the thing is, if it gets destroyed, the question is, why would you just fix it? Why would you not rebuild it in a better way
Well,
at that time?
The lift station, you'd have to fix immediately.
Yeah,
You
true.
You couldn't wait,
Yeah.
you'd have to just replace what was there.
I wonder if sort of national flood insurance is anything that covers that. That's a good Audra
But
question.
You're talking, what I read in here wasn't looking for insurance money, it was looking for
No.
deferred.
Right.
Right,
Deferred-
She's talking about if a disaster happens
Oh,
before
yeah.
we get to,
because that's the time when, like, let's say the bathrooms are ruined, you need public restrooms, so that would be the time to build your restrooms in a way that would be more
Yeah.
resilient,
And
so to
it would have
speak.
been
So,
planned properly.
Yeah.
By means of the money that we saved on not building out projects now.
but, so that's what I'm just thinking, that it's one thing to say, let's not build anything now, But should there be a disaster, wouldn't it be a good idea to have whatever the plan is that you want to do kind of on the shelf so that you can deal with it
Which means,
timely fashion?
bumping it up on the priority list, allocating the money for engineering and design.
Yeah.
To happen right off the bat. I have a question to ask, maybe somebody can answer that. Anita, you may, because I know you've attended some of these meetings. The conversations about the dams, and that was a lot of conversations about removing dams, not replacing the Montgomery Dam, all of that revolved around conversations also about climate change resiliency. This is separate from that conversation, is it not?
Yes.
So does that mean that that is something that's put on the back burner, or do you, as far as what you know, Mark, do you think that's something that might be included in the design and engineering process in order to address the resiliency for the landing?
From my 1/5 portion of the select board, I think it absolutely should be examined. One of the observations that I've seen very much last year and a little bit this year are weather patterns have been really Arctic cold, which is frozen, and then a warm storm that comes in from the south, which is rain, not snow, and then freezing again. So we've had a lot of ice last year, a lot of ice this year. And one of the problems with that, if it continues like that, when we have frozen, iced-in ground and we get huge rainstorms, and the rain doesn't stay like snow does, it flows all at once. We have a flood zone downtown. Our public safety building cannot have our emergency operations center in it because it's in a flood zone. So our emergency operations center is in the Congregational Church.
Public safety buildings, flood zone.
Yes. So what happens is if we get, I went back and looked at, remember the hurricane that came, I believe it was 2011, that came up the coast and veered west and went into Vermont. And it flooded something, over 200 communities, wiped out bridges, covered bridges, all sorts of stuff. If we got that kind of a rainstorm, and the water coming down the river, some of the dams, you're obviously not going to change, but the one that could have an effect is Montgomery Dam, and the study says that, there's a study that says we need to look at changing it, whether that's lowering it, taking it out, whatever. If that dam stays the way it is and traps water in, it'll make the flooding, at least my understanding, would make the chance of flooding that much more severe. So that's something we have to look at, not because of waterfall, not because of fish, but because of, again, this is my thinking, because of drainage and the safety that it provides for the town.
Lack of permeability.
Yeah, permeability, because everything down here is an impermeable surface except the river.
And ice is impermeable too.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking when I look at that. So I think it has to be a part of the whole thing as well. We've got a lot of work to do to really make the town safe.
Boy.
Again, we would be professionals, not we as select board or committees. Or
It
even
would be,
We as the town.
we as the town needing to have the right people to hire to do that kind of study and designing, and then we, the people voting.
We put up the money, yeah.
And probably the worst dam for that is actually the one at the Knox Mill, because wherever, that dam is a very narrow spot, and it
Right.
was deliberately created narrow to create a lot of pressure.
Right.
The one
So-
up here
Yes.
by the assisted
Between the
living.
buildings, yeah,
Yeah.
that's squeezed
Assisted
in between
living.
the buildings.
Not the one, because there's one up here at the assisted living
By
facility.
the pub.
By where.
Oh, down by the
down
pub,
by
not
where
the one up,
pub is.
because there's one right up above it.
It's
Yeah,
the
but
one
The one
down.
by the pub is super narrow, so that's an incredible pressure point. So when the water hits that incredibly, rivers naturally are kind of like a V shape, so as there gets to be more and more water, it spreads out more and more. It can't spread out at all there.
it's like,
One of the
So-
things that we're doing ties into all this is in this year's CIP, we're working with a company called CAI, which is going to put a layer in GIS to map all of our stormwater system. So what they'll come in and locate each stormwater catch basin.
Wow.
And then once that's done, part of what they'll do is they're gonna put develop the database so that then we'll go through and inspect each catch basin, and then we'll survey it in terms of its elevation, and then we'll get the pipe size, the pipe invert, the bottom of the pipe, the catch basin size, the pipe type, which is corrugated or smooth or plastic or metal or fiberglass, whatever it is. And once we have all that data input, then we'll know what our stormwater system, then we can calculate what the stormwater system can hold or take. Because right now, there's really no way of mathematically calculating. I mean, people
Right,
that
how
have been
many
here,
gallons per minute can flow
people can say,
through.
oh,
Yeah.
that place floods, but this, I like having the information.
Yeah.
Because then when I plan to do a road, I can say, well, the reason why we need to put this much money into stormwater in this section of town is because it doesn't have the capacity to carry all of that water, and it'll handle a 25-year flood, or rain, or whatever you want to call it. And that helps with planning purposes and protecting property damage and those kinds of things. Because right now, if we get, a lot of rain in the wintertime, a lot of people's basements really get damaged. I mean, there's everybody's living on a hill, water comes off the mountain, the ground's impermeable, it ends up in their basement. So this would help with a lot of that, and we're working on that this year. And, it would take about a year to get it all really done correctly, but that'll help with planning and some of the things Mark was talking about.
So town is really trying to take a holistic
Yeah.
view on all of this, which makes lots of sense. And it sounds like it's going to be a long-term project.
I think we have, between town management, planner, other department heads, everybody is pretty committed to looking at all of the climate situations we have and trying to look towards the future and figure out what we need to do, being sort of proactive. And it's tough and it's expensive and it takes a lot of time, but I personally can't ignore it.
Right.
We don't have that ability, or we're not doing our job correctly.
Part of the good news is that MDOT is going to be taking care of part of our drainage system, are they not, in this project that starts this coming year? The Main Street and Elm Street?
That's
Drainage system?
really, they're fixing broken catch basins and pipes that are.
But they're not
Getting to
necessarily,
the same standard of today.
Right.
okay, so it's not necessarily becoming a system with better capacity, it's just being replaced and repaired
Correct.
to current standards.
Right, and what I was talking about earlier is going to help us really calculate, what we need to put in place in the different areas to help with stormwater management, so we can reduce property damage and flooding and that kind of thing. It helps you better plan your road projects, because road projects are also our drainage projects. So that's really the objective.
I think one of Dave's problems is people always see the asphalt. Okay, we should fix that, but they don't understand what's underneath because that's invisible. And that's really a lot of the work that has to be done.
It's the most expensive part usually.
The
Yeah,
under,
and-
which you can't see.
Which you can't see, yeah.
And it's that, what Mark was just saying about, like, it's all things that they're hidden from the eye. Like, they cost a lot of money, but you can't see them, they don't look good, and it's hard for a lot of people to imagine, like, why would it cost money? And
Well, if you've had your basement flood,
I'm gonna say,
Yeah.
yeah, that's when you understand.
which we did up on High Street.
And more in the recent years when the ice has been more
Well,
of
it
a
was
problem?
actually, we used to have it flood in the springtime, the melt from Mount Batty, the rain, if we had rain and snow melting, and it comes right down Mount Batty, and then just there you are on the lower side of High Street, just going, oh, I'd love to take out the water in my basement. So you know, at the redo of High Street did help a great deal. But, I mean, I know what that's like, and Superior Maintenance did a wonderful job whenever it happened, but you don't want that happening. Particularly in a lot of old houses just have rubble stone foundations, and the more they get hit by water, the more they can get hit by water, and they become a lot more unstable.
I'll tell a quick story. Years ago, one of the first times I ever ran for everything, I ran for the foolishly presidency of a homeowners board for a 160-unit condo situation in Los Angeles. And we used to have, out of 160 units, we used to have about 15 people show up for the monthly meetings that cared. And the only other time we'd see anybody else when they would say, oh, my plumbing doesn't work, and we'd have to explain that it's not an apartment, that you're responsible for that. And one of the things that I fought for years and years, and finally got it done shortly before I moved out and bought a house, was earthquake insurance. And that condominium was in Northridge, California. It was a half a mile from the epicenter of the big Northridge earthquake. And just think about if you hadn't have fought for that. And that's sort of how I feel about where we are now. Right now it's expensive. Why are we spending this money? Everything looks fine. I never have a problem. But if we have it and we haven't done everything we can do to, fight it off, we're going to be in a world of hurt. Just go back and look at those towns in Vermont that got hit in 2011 by that hurricane. And it's horrible.
Well, I think the examples are everywhere, anywhere you're on a coast, particularly if you're in a coastal community, but Vermont was it because the hurricane went up. But, the king tides and the hurricanes that hit the whole coast, I think we've all seen pictures or even have been there and have seen that happen. Well, thank goodness we've had this report, and looks like the
Here's
town's-
an email from Audra to Nikki Mayonis. Our environmental engineer is trying to schedule a geotechnical engineer to come and do test borings in Harbor Park.
Great.
This is part of the field work necessary to move forward within in the engineering and design for the seawall and the Montgomery Dam.
Great.
Do you see any issues with them coming on the 24th of February? And of course, we don't. So.
And that's the very low part. She's talking about doing the borings right in that stretch of
I
lawn
assume-
behind that seawall up
Yeah.
before you get to the sidewalk.
I assume so.
Well, that's good.
It will entail a small piece of equipment and an auger. So,
So is the plan to raise the seawall there and like raise the level of the park in that area?
I don't know.
The Harbor Park, you know about?
Yeah, Harbor
Yeah,
Park.
okay.
Because right now, the water
Yeah,
comes over the
yeah.
top of the
Under the
seawall. I just
wall,
wondered if
right.
the seawall was raised and the soil was raised.
If they remove the dam, I think Harbor Park would move, the perimeter would move in.
That lower section may
Yeah.
become harbor and not park.
Yeah, I can see that. Yep.
Well, that was
That's-
the natural way the river used to flow.
Right.
And that's because that's fill anyway, like
Yeah.
the
like
landing
landing
is fill.
fill.
Yeah,
So
that lower
those things are
section.
connected, they're definitely connected.
Is there anything else? Do we want to just sort of keep this on the list, or just in another month or so, check in and get an update? Mark, is that something you want to keep us updated on?
It's something we should talk about at every meeting.
Okay.
This is not something you ever want to take off and.
It's just like we do with Dave. What's the latest update on Mechanic Street parking lot or, DOT project? Okay.
So has the select board discussed this report in select board session?
Not yet, no.
Not yet.
Will it be part of the current budget committee discussions?
I can't tell you that yet.
Okay. You can tell us in March.
Okay.
Because I would have had a meeting or two by then.
Okay.
I'm going to sort of, on number 3, committee collaboration, I had historic resources first, and then I had B, Conservation Commission. I'm going to sort of switch it if that's okay with you guys. Dave had sent the link to the article about, I'm going to say this wrong, the emerald ash
ash
borer.
borer,
I keep wanting to call it emerald ash borer, and the work that had been done with the grant. And I had, at Dave's suggestion, thought about contacting a Conservation Commission, which I guess is in the process of being reconstituted.
Hopefully, we would like it to be. We had, basically, the membership dropped off, and we need to rebuild it again, and we just haven't gotten around to that yet. It's one of the, put it on the list.
I did contact Roger Rittmaster, who is former chairman of the Conservation Commission, to come talk to us about it and what he knew about the town's plans going forward on how to sort of implement and what they're going to do to take care of the trees, and particularly had asked if he knew if things had been put in the budget for particularly downtown trees.
I can talk a little bit about that.
And-
Since the report, we have started a tree fund, a reserve account, I believe it's a reserve account, that we're putting money into each year, because the estimate that when the emerald ash borer gets here, it will cost about $250,000 to the town. And that's 2 ways. There is a process that you can save trees by, there's some sort of chemical you can insert and stuff like that. But it's about the same cost, and it has to be repeated, as it is to take a tree down. But we're going to have to do both. There are some iconic trees that we can save, and then there are a bunch else that will have to come down. And the ash borer was not in Maine when we started the study 2-3 years ago, but it's now shown up in 2 or 3 places because it moves a lot of times in firewood. So it showed up in 2 or 3 spots, New Hampshire and Maine now. Not close to us yet, but there's no telling when it could show up. And so, we're putting some money away. I don't know that we're putting enough away, but we are aware and, starting to.
We need that. We really do need that
Yeah.
fund.
And one of the things, I hike around through the woods by the Snow Bowl, and I think there are a lot of ash trees there. And, because it's one thing you can take care of the town and stuff, but what'll happen to the woods around us could be horrifying. Because I think we're very heavy with ash trees.
So the tree fund reserve account is something that hopefully the budget will be adding money to it. And are there any guidelines for how that money gets spent?
Not yet. We're just starting to put some money away.
Because that might be helpful.
But if anybody's on the budget, anybody here on the budget committee this year? Wouldn't be a bad idea to pay some attention to it and, maybe schedule more money.
I can just tell you a little anecdote about from the library's perspective. We lost several trees this past season. We're not even into winter fully yet. But at the beginning of the fiscal year, we had an ash tree that came down just of its own volition. It wasn't ash borer in Meadow parking lot. We had to get rid of that. Had to take it down the rest of the way and out. Then we had a spruce tree fall down in a windstorm in October. And then we lost 2 elm trees in the same windstorm in October. We were able to salvage one. These are in Harbor Park near the memorial. $6,000. My budget is $12,000.
For the removal of those trees? And
$6,000. It's not cheap. And so, I'm really struggling to meet the other demands on that budget. When I say $12,000, I'm talking, doesn't include my compensation and things like that, but it's what we have to spend on. When I hire somebody to do some weeding or some tree pruning or whatever, that's
Does that
where it comes
include the
from.
mowing of the grass and stuff?
No, thank God. The town, we have a wonderful arrangement with the town for that. Ooh, boy.
I noticed with tree removal, there's a wide disparity in bids and costs to take trees down. And I'm sure you checked around too.
I
but-
do, yeah. Yeah, there are two or three contractors that have got the equipment to do it, and they're going to charge you less, you know.
Because they already have the equipment and they're not,
They've got a bucket truck and
Yeah.
stuff like that. They can get up in the tree without having to climb and that sort of thing. But, you know, one tree, just removing one of those trees I was talking about, one of that ash tree, $2,300.
that's,
And it's, I mean, you're talking completely taking it down, bucking it up,
Yeah.
and then taking it to the transfer station.
Yeah, quite a bit of that cost is in at the transfer station. You don't have a place to have mulch, and you don't want that
No.
anyhow.
And you chip the small stuff and everything. But at any rate, I endorse that and will support it in any way I can.
is the grants that we've applied for in the past that paid for the study on the ash trees.
Yes.
Remind me the name of.
Project Canopy?
Project Canopy. Is that money, Dave, you're very familiar with the grant, is that money that needs to be spent in the year you awarded it? You can't.
I
you
don't
get-
know for sure, but I think so.
Okay, so you can't get that money and put it in the bank?
I don't believe so.
No.
think
I know with the grants that I've been associated with, we spent the money the same year.
Because there was a demonstrated need, which is why you applied for.
Year and when we had an early snowstorm in November 2014, we lost 6 trees in the amphitheater, and I was able to get a Project Canopy grant to replace those. So that was that really saved the day. But they also give grants for studies, and that's what this is. And I'm less familiar with those, but
Okay.
I know they do it.
Back to the.
I mean, I know where we could get information too, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
The Conservation Commission, you have a timeline for reconstituting? I think I know somebody who's applied or applying.
It hasn't even come up in conversation. We've been so busy, we haven't, we need to. It hasn't come up in conversation.
Okay. I just wonder if that's a committee we might want to, from time to time, collaborate with and talk to, particularly as it relates to downtown street trees, that if it's, 2 committees, plus I know Pathways has an interest in street trees as well, and so whenever that gets reconstituted, it'd be good for us to be able to make contact with them, and whether we have a joint meeting or a couple of us go one way or the other to find out what we have in common that we could be mutually supportive of.
Do you know what their mission is, or a summary of what their mission is?
You're a former Conservation Commission member, aren't you? No, you're not?
It's, some of the things they did, they were the ones that really sponsored the plastic bag initiative, sponsored getting rid of the polystyrene in the docks and stuff. They put the little plaques that are little metal plaques that are around, say drains directly to the sea. They
Oh,
did
yeah,
those.
on the curbs.
What else? Quite a few things.
They've been
And-
involved in
and-
tree things, though, and weren't they involved?
as-
Do you remember,
not
Anita,
as-
about the bog? Weren't
Yeah, they were involved in the bog. I can't
Creating the
remember what
bog,
they-
sort of saving the bog?
That might have been, that would have been before my time.
That was probably 15 years ago, or 20.
Doug Johnson
Doug Johnson used to,
he was the chairman for
a long time. He
25
dropped
years
off.
or something, yeah.
Well, so it hasn't been tree-oriented since he left.
I know, and I think they were involved in discussions about use of what I call the gravel pit, Sagamore Farm. I know that they had
Yeah.
some conversations regarding that. Okay. Well, we'll keep our eye open on what happens with the Conservation Commission.
I can tell you what its mission statement, what its purpose is. I'm looking online.
Great.
The purpose of the Conservation Commission shall be to serve as a research, advisory, and advocacy group on environmental and conservation issues relating to the town. Pretty straightforward.
I would think they also would have a great interest in the resiliency issue.
They might want to change their mission statement to add that.
Well, it's environmental.
It's across all boards, just as this design group is struggling with it. Our energy committee is struggling with it, pathways even. I mean, it's across the board. The issue.
Yeah, that touches everybody. Anything else on the tree or the Conservation Commission? Historic resources. We talked about them in our last meeting as possibly, was there somebody from Historic Resources that we could bring on board or have, as becoming a member or visiting? And then, of course, somebody said, well, they meet at the same time we do, 4 o'clock on Tuesdays. So I, not knowing the new chairman, I got in contact with Pat Scaling of Historic Resources and brought up the subject with her about collaborating and could we have a joint meeting at some point in the future to talk about which issues and things we might be able to collaborate on or support each other on, work together on. For instance, like downtown signage would be something that might fall in both areas. Both committees might be really interested. And I also happened to have a conversation with Rosie Glass today, who is back on the Historic Resources Committee. And they liked that idea, and they're going to talk about it today in their meeting. So I bring it up to you. How do you all feel about having a joint meeting and trying to do some cross-pollination?
And also, in the meantime, I read a pretty interesting article that was about the writer of the article was obviously skeptical about the tack that the Washington, D.C. Historic Commission was taking with when people wanted to make improvements to their historic homes that actually made them more energy efficient, whether it be adding solar panels to the roofs or insulated glazing in the windows or whatever it was. And it's kind of it's a design issue and it's a historic issue. And not that we have any rules in town yet, but there's always mumblings about that. And I thought it's really interesting. It's like, you're preserving it, but is it any good to preserve it if it's all just going to get destroyed because you haven't dealt with your energy issues? So it was interesting.
That's interesting because I know that's one of the issues with fixing the windows in the front of this building, because this building is a national landmark, not just on the National Register, but a National Historic Landmark. What does that preclude the town from doing in those windows that need replacing ASAP? So that's very interesting. So there hasn't been any resolution. I mean, theoretically, we replaced those large windows with double glaze. They are double glazed now.
They are double glazed now.
But the
Those
seal's
are not,
broken.
none of those windows are original windows that are there. You're not taking away something historic and putting something
The whole
back.
building.
The
has
whole
new
building's
windows.
been reglazed. In fact, this is the second reglazing. The first glazing they were like bronze colored windows, and they, by, I want to say the 1990s, had gotten into terrible shape. And so the windows that are there now are replacement windows that are slightly more historic in their profile than the bronzy ones looked like, kind of like office building windows.
These are Marvin windows. I
These
think.
are Marvins, but they're not historic, except in their general look. So, but it is funny. So generally, unless there is legislation in the town, the only thing the federal government can do, the rules of the National Register only apply to federal projects.
Right.
So if this was a federal building, they would be under their own constraints. But because we're not a federal building, what we wouldn't be able to do is get grants to do something.
Federal grants.
Federal grants to do something that was not historically accurate.
Could you not, though, lose your designation?
Yes, you could if whatever you did was bad enough. So changing the windows that aren't already historic windows is not going to be bad enough.
Yeah.
But putting giant solar panels on the top of the Opera House building?
See, there's a question. That's a question. And like, I think a lot of that would have to do with whether it would be visible to the general public, you know? And it's so high up, probably it wouldn't be. But
The reality is it should be.
so anyway, it's an interesting thing. When we were renovating Beach Hill, the Land Trust had a grant from whether, I think it was a federal grant, but it was being administered through the State Historic Commission. And they wanted the Land Trust to put wood windows in, wood on the outside as well as the inside. But we wanted to have windows that were wood on the inside, but clad on the outside. I mean, the environment's horrible up there. And the Land Trust was like, you know, the amount of time we're going to be spending scraping and painting and trying to maintain those windows, $17,000 is like chump change compared to the long run viability of the building. And you go up there and think, oh boy, that sure is tacky. They have metal on the outside of the windows. So, you know, it's good. It's a balancing act, in my view.
I think that's a good,
Yeah.
those windows are good up there. I
There's-
remember a project I worked on, the Breton Arms Hotel at Mount Washington, New Hampshire, is a historic landmark, and we were not allowed to put double glazing on this building. They threw millions of dollars in, and the windows remained single thick. The same thing, I believe, happened when I was working on the Shepherd Block in Rockport, where they sort of, you know, like there's an interior window you can put in, that, you know, people.
Oh, right. So a
So it's-
removable is just fine.
It's until you want to have a little air in the room.
But I'll bet
It's
you,
just counterintuitive.
I'll bet you that the attitudes are going to change on these issues. I just can't imagine that they're not. We're all, look at how sensitive everybody is already.
We're talking about DC now, right?
We're talking about anywhere.
Well, that's what the article was about, DC, and
Right.
what, you know, people are going through, mainly in private homes that are in historic districts.
Do you have a link to that?
I can't even remember if it was in the New York Times or where it was. I'll try and find it.
If you
I'll try
find it
and
and you can send it around, might be something interesting for us all to.
But to
see.
get back to your
Yeah.
question, I would fully endorse the idea of having a joint meeting now and then with the Historic Resources Commission. If I wasn't at this meeting, I would be at that meeting. And I used to go as a guest, in that, because that is a town committee, I'm not allowed, I can't be appointed to it because I live in Rockport. But I would go as a guest, and I was a welcome guest.
Actually, you can be appointed to it.
Really?
The one thing I learned when I joined the select board and went to the MMA discussion about everything, and I verified it and I asked the question 2 times. The only 2 positions in a town that you're required to be a town resident are select board and school board.
Oh, is that so?
You can be an appointed member of that committee. You know, a lot of the committees don't know that, but you absolutely can. It would have to be in the town charter to outlaw it.
And unless I suppose the select board, when they wrote the charter for the committee, decided that each member needs to be a town resident. I mean, that could be done.
And I think that would be foolish if your people don't want to contribute their time and
That's
energy.
why we got Dave here. I mean, not only, but he's also the representative of Harbor Park and the library.
Well, yeah, I
which
mean, the
so
thing is, I represented a pretty
Significant.
significant chunk of the historic resources in the town.
That's right.
Where does that historic meet?
They meet in the Walsh History Center.
Oh,
I call it the mezzanine level in between.
Yeah, it's the History Center. You know, I mean, I would even go so far as to say, maybe we should, there's nothing sacrosanct about meeting on Tuesday. Maybe we can meet on Wednesday and then and then as needed, have a joint meetings with the Historic Resources Commission. We don't need to meet, I mean, the thing is,
Right.
we can't, we can't discuss some of the things we did early in this meeting, at those meetings, but if we're talking about signage and things like that, we definitely have a lot in common.
Were you suggesting that we have our joint meeting other than a Tuesday, or that one of our committees change our regular meeting date?
I'm suggesting the latter, I think. I think rounding everybody up for another meeting, a joint meeting would be hard. But I think if they have a regular schedule and we have a regular schedule, then we could, I mean, let's say we met on Wednesday instead of Tuesday. And then if we decided that, okay, next month, we really have some things we want to talk to the Historic Resources Commission about, let's meet on Tuesday with them,
What about, I guess this wouldn't work, but if you would give us the main reading room of the library, it'd be nice to have both work in different parts of that room and collaborate.
Well,
What that is these meetings are supposed to be streamed.
How do they handle that on Historic Resources?
I don't have the slightest idea.
Those meetings are
And I remember that,
You're not liaison to that.
I don't think those.
there's plenty of room in the History Center for all of us.
But I think it would be more interesting in a way to have Historic Resources come into this meeting room, so that might be a meeting that would be
Sure.
of interest. People might want to watch that later on YouTube, or might want to watch live streamed. So I think if
I
we
think
had a
that's
joint one,
that's the way to go, yeah, good.
this might be the best place to do it.
They could have the rest of their meeting in another spot of this
yeah,
building.
I don't know that you need to change the meeting date. It's just that, because it's not going to happen that often when you're going out there. Just have a joint meeting once in a while.
And let's see how that goes, and if we want to cross-pollinate
One
more.
time when everybody's available because they plan for it, don't change that. Just
Yeah,
have everybody meet in one
Use
place.
in this room, this table and that. Could happen.
Well, we even
Epiphany.
could say that, invite them to the first half of our meeting, that sort of thing.
And the other way to handle that is, since they're not regularly streamed anyway, if we arranged it ahead of time, they could have the second half of their meeting in the Tucker Room. So they don't have to
Yeah.
follow it out to the library.
You could start with one, meet together, and then finish with the second, so both meetings are streamed.
Yeah, that's quite possible. Yeah, we could start at 3 maybe if that were possible, or they could, or whatever. Is there sort of a consensus that if Historic Resources hasn't just said, ooh, no, I'll approach them and talk about when we might want to do that?
And these would be
Madam Chairman?
occasional, right, Deb?
Pardon?
Occasional.
Yes, yeah, and I think
Yeah.
it'd be nice to have, one to start with and say,
How's it work?
yeah, and what are you guys working on, and what we're working on, and, how could we support each other?
The design team is a big mystery to that group. As I recall, when I haven't been to a meeting now for well over a year, but,
Pathways Committee just had a summit of all kinds of organizations that are interested in paths. So we had Coastal Mountains Land Trust, we had Georges River, we had, I think, Rockland, we had all kinds of different organizations that are all interested in paths of different types in different places. We got together and said, okay, is there anything we could coordinate? Can we make connections between what you're doing, what we're doing? So I think those are very beneficial meetings.
I think the other group that it would be nice to touch base with from time to time would be CDAC, which is the Camden Economic Development Advisory Committee, and the downtown is a huge part of the economic health of Camden, and I think that would be another group worth touching base with. But let's start with Historic Resources and then keep tabs on the Conservation Commission. And I know that, I think Meg Keanu is still on CDAC.
Yes.
So she's sort of our liaison if anything is going on, but I think that committee's been somewhat quiet. I could be mistaken.
getting more involved, because Jeremy Martin is pretty much running that committee now, so he's tasking them with different things and looking at different things, so they're getting more involved with his guidance.
So you're still involved with Pathways, Anita?
You want to get together with that?
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
you know, 'cause
we haven't
I
formally,
actually-
I've talked to you.
I think that, Pathways and Pedestrian is really part of design. And
Actually-
there's a lot of ways that Camden could be more pedestrian-friendly.
Right.
And-
Well,
We got their support for the Harbor Walkway,
Yeah.
which was very important.
and the meeting that was canceled last week because of weather, that's going to be on the 24th of this month. The heads-up meeting about pedestrian safety.
Yes.
And that's something DOT is requiring that our community hold in order for us to be able to write for grants or funding. So in a particular program, Camden has been identified as a safety risk area for pedestrians. There's particular places in the state, and Camden's one of them. So we are able to get some funds for projects. And in order to qualify for those funds, we need to have this summit meeting. Sorry, I shouldn't be calling it a summit, but a community meeting. It's going to be at the middle school on the 24th. That's the rain date. And it's one of those meetings that's really, really important for people to attend.
What time is the meeting on the 24th? I know there's signs around, and there was right on the front of the town website.
I think it's 25th.
Is it 25th?
It's the 25th, and it's at 6 o'clock.
Thank you.
And it's the Pedestrian Safety Forum held by the MDOT, and it's put on by the Bicycle Coalition of Maine. They're going to be, it's kind of a really cool meeting.
Sorry,
because-
6 o'clock, yeah, you're right.
Is it the 25th?
It is the 25th.
Yeah, and what they do is, it's educational as well as a problem-solving type of meeting. So you go into the meeting, and they give everybody the remote clickers, and they run through all kinds of scenarios, and they have everybody vote, and then they show you the results real time, and then they give you what the answer really is. So it's informational. And then once they do that, they break people into groups, and then there's usually a scribe, and what they'll do is they'll talk about problem areas within the town, and then the person who's taking notes will write those down, and then they compile the different groups as information together, and they try to see the commonalities of the problems, and then they rank them, and then they put them up on the board, and then they start going through the issues and how to resolve them. And then there's a follow-up meeting later on with town staff, and we do a walkthrough with some of the DOT engineers, and we look at what we can do to resolve some of the issues. And then, based on the results, there's some that, are easily implemented, there's some that take infrastructure and money to make repairs or improvements. And at that time, usually, there's an opportunity to get funds from MDOT. And then we design the improvements and we implement them.
Thanks, Dave. That's
Yeah,
very,
in
very
Rockland?
helpful.
Great summary.
Had you been involved in that? in
Yeah, I
Rockland?
did the one in Rockland, and we ended up Park and Main Street. I don't know if you recall, it was hard to cross in that whole block area, and we moved the crosswalk out because it was identified as a place where cars were turning and they could hit somebody because the crosswalk was too far in. So originally, we were just going to move that crosswalk out, but what we ended up doing is fixing all of the crosswalks and all of the tip downs, and we made them all ADA accessible, and then we changed the traffic signal, so it was on a grid smart system. And then right before I left, I was working on the McDonald's, the Maverick Street intersection, which is super dangerous. There's really no way to get around there. But they're working on that now. It was all ready to go.
Pedestrian at that corner, because it's so
But you
intimidating.
can't, there's no safe way of
Yeah.
walking around that intersection right there. So what happened was we all had it all ready to go, but DOT pulled out of the improvements on the road on Route 1, if you remember, because of the cost. So that kind of stopped, but.
Have the risky or the unsafe places that you talk about been identified already in Camden, or is that that happens in the meeting?
So those can be subjective, because, if you're a disabled person and you live on a certain street, to you, the crosswalk in another part of town is probably not that important, but you need to be able to get to the store, or you need to be able to get to your caregiver, or, and that's what they're trying to get from people. They want to know, how can we help you safely get to different locations if you're a pedestrian? And how can we help motorists be aware of pedestrians? And, there's all kinds of issues. They can be different. It depends on who you are,
So there isn't a list that MDOT has already come up with, or pathways?
It's you walking around going, I hate this. This is dangerous for me. I don't
Where's
like
this?
it.
Yeah.
So isn't there a,
that, but also a design and a zoning issue. So I'm working on a project in South Thomaston, so that caused me to read the South Thomaston zoning code. And one thing that was fascinating is that it talks about plantings, and even on a private property in South Thomaston, from an intersection, you cannot have any plant above 3 feet tall that is not a shade tree. It's within 40 feet of the center of the intersection. I'm like, that is such a smart thing to have in the zoning code, because there's so many blind corners in Camden because of.
Free Street and Elm Street on the
Yeah.
town side across from the Congo Church, the hedge.
And the same thing on Park Street and Pearl. You can't see what's coming, and I'm like, that would be a really interesting thing.
Just
to-
remember, though, that's sometimes private property, and that really gets tricky sometimes.
well, there are
because-
lots of regulations
Yeah.
on what you can and can't do on your private property.
But I mean, if you don't have a code or an ordinance in
Right,
place.
exactly. So it's,
So, I mean, that's
Thomaston
the
has a
thing.
code.
she's talking about
Has
a
a code.
code in South Thomaston. We're
Right.
talking about a lack of code here for certain things.
Exactly.
But you wouldn't, I mean, I don't think you could create a code and have someone's hedge down, they wouldn't probably like that.
I'll tell you where another one is,
But I
Coming out of the
think
state
some of
park.
these hedges might be on.
that's state land. When you come
It might
out
be
of
the
that
right-of-way.
road to get onto Route 1, and you look for northbound or southbound traffic coming from the Belfast area, that topography just needs to be clipped a little bit.
You have to come out pretty far
And, and
Especially
cars are
when
still
the
traveling
snow
closer to
piled
50
up.
miles an
out of
hour
the
there.
state park
From the
onto Route
mountain,
1.
from the mountainside,
On the
not the water
mountainside,
side.
mountainside.
I asked at the park about that, and she said I had to go to the MDOT.
Well, they're coming here.
I mean, that's really the opportunity to talk about those things.
So did you, in Rockland, discover any reduction in accidents as a result of the improvements?
Well, that was only a year after, I mean, that was only implemented and finished construction last season, so I wouldn't been there long enough to see any of the results, but
We stole them before he could find out.
I guess you don't know the ones that you potentially,
Well, a reduction in
Saved,
numbers.
yeah, you
Yeah.
don't know who you saved.
but I can tell you it was dangerous. And we did a lot of other things too. I mean, we didn't just do that. There's a lot of like just striping and moving things, and there was all kinds of things that were identified that we went through. I mean, part of what we did was we put the sharrows in the loop from Union Street and Main Street. We walked through with the traffic engineers, and we were putting the icons in the road to let people know that, bicyclists can use the road also. But you can't just go and put one anywhere. You need to put them in certain spots. And you got to look and make sure they're not in the shade, and there's all kinds of different things you really need to look at when you do that kind of thing. So you get everybody that has a different perspective on it, and then you all kind of agree on, all right, this is where we're going to put it, and then you do it, and then you make it
Well,
happen.
Sounds interesting. I'm glad you brought it up because
So
I-
mark your calendars, that's a Tuesday, so
Tuesday
you can just
evening.
gather up your stuff and march on over there if you want to meet in
And it's at the middle school.
middle school.
in the cafeteria or whatever. We've had those kinds of meetings there
It's a
before.
good meeting.
It would
really
be good
is.
to pass the word, because this is one of those, every now and then, in our town, we have these sort of really important meetings, planning meetings, and I really see this as one of the really, really important ones that voices need to be heard.
I'd like to just add one more thing. It's super important for another reason too, because it helps the select board and the town manager and myself understand the needs of the community. And then that helps us with planning.
To prioritize projects.
Right. So, if we hear like, we want a walking path to this place, we hear that, and then that ends up becoming something we can maybe fit into another project or any of those kinds of things. So it's really important to have the community there to.
Well, I'm just going to throw this out here because we have a pathways person, we have public works. So living on Hosmer Pond Road, I see everything that goes up and down. And I really hope that someday on someone's radar, just like you can walk on a sidewalk from downtown to the state park, you'll be able to go on a sidewalk or at least a bike path from downtown to the Snowball, because so many of those kids, I see all the kids with their mountain bikes heading out to the Snowball, and I'm just like, it's amazing there hasn't been an accident.
It's very narrow.
It's super, and you can't get off the road because the trees aren't cut back, so there's like, you'll be hitting tree branches when you're on a bicycle, you're tall enough, if you try and get onto the shoulder if something big is
Go
coming.
ahead, Dave.
Right, so I noticed that almost immediately. And I've been working, actually, last week, I'm working on a municipal partnership agreement or initiative with the state, because that's a state road.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it unless we contribute something towards it. Now, this isn't saying this is going to get done. It has to go through all the right channels and everything, but if approved, you get the $500,000 for the project. And part of that project, I've already talked about it with the engineers, putting a bike lane all the way from Elm Street to the Snowball.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Now, that's a
On one
big,
side or the other, or?
well, it would only be on one side, but it's a big undertaking because
Oh, yeah,
there's
it's so
serious,
narrow.
there's serious drainage problems.
There sure are.
And then when you get over to where the flooding was, I want to bring the elevation of the road up right there, put a box culvert in, put drainage all along the right side of the pond. That would widen the road for the bike path. So I have it all noodled out and I'm writing it
Oh,
up right
that's
now.
fantastic.
So if I'm starting at the Snowball coming back to town, what route are we taking?
So you would just basically come down the Hosmer Pond Road.
What side would the bike path be on?
Well, I mean, that isn't determined
Yeah.
yet.
Oh,
It's
okay.
where you
Hosmer
where you
Pond.
can put it. And you basically come down Mechanic Street all the way to Elm. Because the second part of the project, which is part of this planning Audra talked about.
Not John Street to Elm, but Mechanic Street.
Mechanic, you kind of veer off left
So you
at
go
Simon.
down
In
Mechanics.
town, not out to like.
Not out to Route 1.
Not out to that.
Yeah, but there's, will
Difficult.
be a sidewalk all the way down.
So a second part of the project
Okay.
is the Mechanic Street part.
Got it.
So the upper part, Hosmer Pond Road is the state road. The municipal partnership initiative would
Yeah.
assist with that. And then the other part, we're working on the Mechanic Street engineering part, which would put a walking path and a bike lane all the way down to Elm as part of the reconstruction. So that's a big kind of, a lot of things have to line up to make
That
all
would
that
be
work.
so great.
But I think there's a big benefit to the town to have something like that getting to the
We know
snow.
it's a high priority for us.
But, it's kind of a long-term, big goal, and you never know, it might work and it might not.
Is there such a thing as a walkable communities in any state, or is there a designation of communities? Like you read,
I think there is. I
You read a lot
think there's
about it.
actually some place where like they've rated towns in walkability. Because I think, and Camden downtown itself got a pretty good score.
I think
It was. It'd
Denver,
be nice
Colorado.
to be part of a group of walkable communities. You read about, a lot of people write into Quora and this kind of stuff about what are the most walkable cities in the U.S., and they list those ones, and it's like something to be revered, I want to go to these communities where you can,
Denver, Colorado, I think qualifies.
yeah, and San Francisco and Boston, I mean, there's
Wow.
Even Manhattan, it's really amazing. If you've ever tried to go biking or hiking there, you'd be amazed at how many opportunities there are.
It's not ones like Phoenix.
They've been, New York's been making big efforts in the last 15 years.
Really?
Okay, sadly, Rafi is not here. If we're going to move on and talk about Mural, I do have some information from him. He has met and talked with Alexis, whose last name
Marino.
Emarino. In short, Alexis' idea is to have a small working group, not to come try to talk to all of us, but like work with Rafi and perhaps two others, and the suggestion was Dave and Donna, to meet with Alexis. She gave Rafi a quote on if she took on the project as the project director. And I'm trying to find my piece of paper, but the quote is a minimum of $9,000 if she runs the whole thing to almost $13,000, and that does not include materials, and that is way beyond what any of us had decided was feasible for us to raise and spend money on that wall. So Rafi's suggestion is a much simpler version of working with her, but suggesting that we have a small group to meet with her and talk about it. She has looked at the wall, like all of us have looked at the wall, and we've had other people look at the wall, and she says, it's a tough wall. It's not like the nice brick walls in downtown Rockland because of the condition of it and the variety of the materials. So she was saying if you wanted to do something with as many straight lines as the thought of the flags, that's going to take painting on another object and applying to the wall. However, I'm not so sure we all are completely married to needing to do that. And so the thought is, what ideas does she have as an alternative? And she said she's worked with students, and they've used something called coma board that you can paint on and then apply, not like the more expensive materials that we were talking to, the state sign services of Maine. And one of the thoughts that I shared with Rafi is, I don't believe we need to cover that whole wall with a design. Our first goal is to cover that whole wall with a nice coating of paint to freshen that up and not have it be such an eyesore, and then work on applying a design to it. And you brought up the right thing, the paints have to be compatible and everything. But that whole wall does not need to be covered with a design. And I'm going to quickly pass this around. I'm not saying these are the ones we'd want to do, but there are a number of murals out there where people have not painted the whole wall. But the design doesn't have to be something that fills the space. The background color can fill the space, but the design doesn't, which would certainly keep lots of costs down. So I think our next step is to have, if Dave and Donna are willing to do this, meet with Alexis and Rafi. But I think in order to make this happen, I think that maybe Donna and Dave, if the two of you could get together and come up with some dates that you could meet and propose those to Rafi in order to help that happen. I think that would help that move forward.
What is our goal for the preliminary painting?
We don't know what color we want to put up there, but we want to paint something.
Timing.
I think we want to do that as long as we don't interfere with what Dave is doing on the Mechanic Street lot.
I have some times.
And
You have some times, and he has some
times.
times.
I had a task last meeting to talk to Steve Caron.
Yep.
Yeah, and I called him, several days ago. The guy is like super cooperative.
He can't wait to do something to help us on that
And
wall.
he said that will be no reaction between the base and two finish coats he puts on that wall and our mural paint adhering to it. And he referenced that his father's a sign painter, And for years, Dave's been preparing buildings for the sign painters paint, and they've had good, and he's thrilled to be doing this, and once they.
He donated half of the
Yeah.
expense to painting that whole wall for us. Steve Karen, painter, he's, for cost of $1,000, he's willing to donate the labor, we buy the paint, to get a base coat of some nice color on that whole wall. So it gives us a nice base. Those are just some things I pulled off the internet. I happen to love the bees flying across the building and then collecting in the corner. And it really, well, the painter said, the designer said, it was really because of the threat to the bees and the collecting of the hive was important. But those were just samples of, it doesn't take a design like Watertown, which I love in Rockland, on that wall in downtown Rockland. That design that Alexis came up with is beautiful, and it fills that wall. But it isn't necessary to have an impact with having every square inch designed. Yeah, go ahead.
Make a suggestion?
Sure.
I loved Meg's idea of working with the rising and falling water for the harbor masters. And that's a way of thinking a little bit out of the box and working with what you've got to work with, right? And so you've got a rough surface, you've got a box there. You've got some
boxes.
you've got some poles.
Junks.
Birch trees.
A rough surface kind of, I'm thinking sponging trees, you know,
Eric Hopkins trees.
a rough sort of sponging where you're not, middle schoolers could do it. You're not asking for skills, but if you get a sense of trees, you've got the verticals of birch trees. You could throw a few more on just for fun. You could put a little roof on the box, and now you've got a little town, and you could almost get a sense of Mount Batty and the boathouse. If it had a little roof on that box and that box are painted red, you could have a boathouse. You could have masts of the windjammers or those poles. You know, you can make suggestions that actually working with what you have there instead of trying to make it invisible.
There are a lot of murals that do use the structures that are there that
Yeah.
paint through or over the
So
structure,
the-
so
You
you're
should
not
consider,
hiding it.
What walls there is an asset, not a liability.
The roughness is, the straight lines, I think, will be hard to keep straight unless you apply a board.
Yeah, and that's one of Alexis' comments, is
Yes.
that straight 90-degree that wall does not accommodate straight lines without,
But
applying a surface
Think about
material.
sort of mostly forested Mount Batty, sponged on, and then, add a few more boxes for buildings and just actually kind of create a whimsical Camden Head Harbor view.
Or the waterfall, which may go away.
Windjammer masts.
Or be
The
more
nice
natural.
thing, the nice thing about the photos you had were you could design something that was above the parked
Above the cars.
Because half of,
Yeah, that's what I think
Walls
is.
8 feet of that wall
Yeah.
is going to be blocked, particularly
Right.
when they're
And so
pickup trucks.
we can capitalize on that by designing something like the
That's
bees.
up above, or,
That's
well,
up.
something that is, and doesn't have to be as realistic, because that wall does not support realism.
No, it doesn't.
Which is that beautiful design that Colin had come up with, but it was so fine, every stroke on that design was a very precise, it was like, done by a graphic designer, and that's why that would have to have gone on those, on those panels, yes.
Two things. Are we throwing out the design that came up? Because we voted on that at one point, and that's always been a simple, easy, very responsive thing, I think, to
I don't think we're rejecting it, but we have had some, comments about the, in order to execute that, we would have to do that on panels that would have to get applied.
I don't agree with that.
You don't?
I think
I
that,
think it would be easy to paint, but.
I think it would be
agree.
easy
I
to
think-
paint.
I think-
For,
I think it could be done.
It's at such a large scale, the unevenness of the lines,
You
you
stand
could do
back.
it with a roller.
And I'm actually not so sure it makes a difference if you don't want it exact like a flag.
Yeah,
It'd look better if it had
Little
fringe on the
roughness.
corner.
I mean, it doesn't bother me, but I'm really not wedded to that as a design. I'm
I know,
happy
but I
to-
think it's.
What I don't want is something that is like realism with depth. I think it needs to be graphic because of the rough texture of the
That would be
wall.
some, like, I admire your thoughts on that, but if you're trying to paint something that looks like Mount Batty, wouldn't it be easier just to go like this and see the real thing?
As long as the mountain's still there, I'm not
Suggest.
worried about the
This
mountain.
is, if we start to redesign again,
Oh,
you can
I know.
wait another year at least. And number two, I apologize, but my son has a function at the middle school.
Yeah, we should be thinking about,
We should be thinking
yeah.
about that too.
But I was also going to say, when we were just having that discussion about design, I think I've seen this movie before.
Yeah, I know we have.
Yeah, yeah,
Move on.
yeah.
That might be
Well-
interesting for you two to,
and I don't think, if we wanted to stay with Meg's flags, I don't think it would be a technical issue.
Okay.
We're not in a gallery looking at a painting.
Yeah.
We're standing behind. and-
Okay. What I'd like to do is delegate.
Why don't we just form a group to do it?
Well, then the two of you and Rafi, if you guys would get together and come up with dates, and I think it would be, Rafi's, got lots on his plate at Maine Media. So it would be really helpful if the two of you could say, okay, here are some dates, let's get together and have this small work group meeting.
And Anita, I'm not disparaging your idea, it's just like we started out
With
talking
with my
about
flag.
things like that too, you know.
I think if you're not expecting
Paint it on
perfection,
that surface.
you just put out the word that we need volunteers to paint this thing. You get a bunch of rollers and brushes and you have someone manage it.
Well, yeah, and you chalk it in.
Snap.
So Anita, are they talking about, what was her,
Alexis?
Alexa, talking about using students, or is that?
Are we
off?
still using students?
Is that
Well,
off?
she's suggesting not.
Yeah.
she's the teacher though, right?
No, Alexis is.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The
okay.
mural designer. She designs the murals and
I forgot the
coordinates
name
them.
of the
The
teacher.
teacher
Background.
person has
Bailed on
backed
us,
out.
yeah.
The high school art student has
I think we
classes
should
backed out.
leave whether or not students get involved till we get into the point of executing it, and then decide.
Personally, I think all of us could show up on a Saturday.
Well, we could invite the public.
Same
Just
thing.
come. Bring your coffee,
it
bring your
done.
sodas.
I want a card that absolves me for all sins of how poorly it looks at the end.
And what paint they get on your beautiful new asphalt.
Yeah, well, no.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, you said you had some dates.
Yeah,
Before we go, we have 2 minutes.
so-
Or no minute, 3 minutes.
So the projects that we talked about, Sand Street, Mechanic Street, and Norwood, the bid went out yesterday. And the first pre-bid meeting is on the 19th. The bids are due on the 28th,
19th of who? March?
February.
Okay.
Anticipated award would be around March 17th. Construction would start in April.
Ooh,
Project completion would be Mechanic Street parking lot around May 20th. Sand Street would be July 3rd, and Norwood Avenue would be July 24th. And that's from Pearl to Elm Street,
So 520 for the lot. So,
barring
Right.
unforeseen circumstances like money and bids and all those kinds of things, which can always happen.
And those are the dates that you specified when you sent out the bid, or?
Yes,
Yeah,
those
okay.
are in the bid.
Yeah, and so do we know in advance that those dates are practical?
Well, these are liquidated, there's liquidated damages in the contract, so if they don't get done by the completion date, they get a huge.
Okay, so in other words, this is it, you guys conform to it, or
We try and do that.
Yeah.
They get done before you have to reward them?
they tell you that that's not practical, we can't do it, and then,
Well, yeah, and then we negotiate from
Negotiate,
there,
yeah.
but
Okay.
realistically, I think this is very doable.
Is the smart thing, obviously the lot's going to be closed because you're repaving and doing the wall construction. Is it best for us to try to come in before you reopen the lot and do it because it would have been closed, or wait till the end of the summer and do it? I mean, my thought
We
is
have
if
a
it's
nice
been.
working surface to work off of when it was all done.
I'd say just put barriers in whenever we need them. They're not getting.
I was just thinking, if people are used to not being able to park there, they might not mind 4 more days.
And what we can work with, it, work as a,
Keep that row clear.
Well, we certainly could keep that road clear.
I'm sure we could figure something out to be able to get people in there and paint if we have to.
Okay.
There's not a problem with that.
All right, so you two are going to help us make this meeting happen. Please.
So,
That would be great. Because Rafi's all for having the small work group.
And he's hard to get a hold of, so we'll get.
You guys have contact information for each other?
You had his email?
I have your email, but I'm going away until March 1st,
when you're leaving.
a week from today.
Maybe you guys could have a preliminary meeting before then, or at least try to. I'll let you guys work that out. Next meeting is scheduled for March 10th.
Okay.
Good contributions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for letting me.
Oh, yeah.
See what's going on.
Thank you. Dave, let me have a chat with you as soon as we get up about trees, about the trees, things. Sure. I'll do it so it's